Okay, in this movie we're going to go over the 8th question type in the argument section, and this is the principal scenario question type, and this is somewhat of a variation on the principal justify question type, and you'll see in a second. So, taking a look at the basic information for this question type, for principal scenario questions, the content isn't always an argument. So the content will sometimes be just the principle, sometimes it'll be an argument, and sometimes it'll just be a scenario. Now the question has several different wording variations, and the one we have here is which one of the following judgments most closely conforms to the principle cited by the philosopher, or you could just say which one of the following most closely conforms to the principle above, or which one conforms most closely to the principle illustrated by the argument above, or which one most closely confirms to the principle that the passage illustrates. Anything along those lines. It asks for which thing conforms to a principle that's in the content. The correct choice for these questions states an argument or collection of statements that provide the best example of the principle in the content. Now, these questions appear regularly in every test, and you'll generally find them more towards the middle and towards the end of the argument section. So basically, this is the principal justify question type in reverse. For the principal justify question, you're evaluating an argument to identify the principle that it uses. For the principal scenario questions, you're looking at a principle and identifying the argument that uses it. And the content for these questions will come in 3 distinct variations. So it might simply be a statement of a principle, a general rule that can be applied to specific situations. It might be an argument that rests on a principle to provide justification for the conclusion, or it might be a scenario that isn't an argument but that illustrates a general principle or rule. The choices are specific examples that illustrate the principle through an application in an argument or an illustration in a scenario. So the general approach, having a good idea of the premise and the specific concepts used, is the most important thing. First, you need to establish a clear picture of the principle or general rule involved. So if the content is an argument, use the same procedure as in the previous section to determine the principle. Pay attention to what is needed to get from the premises to the conclusion and come up with a working conditional. If the content is not an argument, then likewise use the same procedure as in the previous section. Look for the more abstract statements and think of a good general summary that captures the information in the content. And obviously, if the content is a principle, then that part is very straightforward. Next, use the principle that you've come up with to evaluate the choices. So make sure to have the sufficient condition in the principle correspond to the premises and the necessary condition correspond to the conclusion. Likewise, pay attention to any shifts in terms and be on the lookout for contrapositives. In terms of right answers and wrong answers, the correct answer will provide an example of the principle in the content. So if it's an argument, the premises will correspond to the sufficient condition in the conditional and the conclusion to the necessary condition. And keep in mind the choice might be an example of a contrapositive of the principle. If not an argument principle, the answer choice will be an example of the correct concepts discussed in the content, and there won't be any subtle shift in terms. The incorrect answer will provide an example that doesn't use the principle in the content. So as in the previous section, either the sufficient or the necessary condition might not correspond with the premises or the conclusion, or they might be reversed, or there might be a shift in terms. For the content that isn't an argument, the example in the choice won't deal with the same concepts. So the basic approach to doing these questions is to have a good grasp of the principle in the content and to pay attention to the answer choices so that you're not tricked by reversals in the conditions or shifts in meaning.